My name is Nikki Jensen, and I was asked to speak on the topic of the Great Plague, 1665. And throughout this, I've chosen to compare it to today's pandemic and how they're similar and how they're different. The title of my slideshow is Plagues Then and Now, and I would like to start with an overview. This occurred in 1665 and continued on through 1666. It was the most explosive outburst of the bubonic plague in London. So this was not like the whole entire plague of the bubonic plague, but it was a reoccurrent, like an outburst in London after the main outburst of this. This plague forced many people out of their homes. They retreated and they were trying to escape this plague since it was really hard to know how to deal with it in their time period. All of their treatment methods were detrimental. They used leeching and often believed that it was within your blood, and you had to get rid of blood to be able to feel better, which is not true. The borders of London and all of its trading was closed, and in total, the Black Plague killed about 200 million people worldwide out of the 500 million that were there at that time. Going into the more specifics, the Black Death or bubonic plague, it was the most destructive plague in all of history, continuing through the present. It affected not just London, but it affected Africa, India, the Middle East, and Eastern Asia. Another note is that this plague was not a virus, it was a bacteria. So this plague started in about 1346, and it started as just a rumor, and it began in China and India before making its way west. Many people heard about entire civilizations just ending up dead in days, but nobody had really seen it yet, and so many people didn't actually believe it. This disease was spread by fleas on rats, and the quick buildup of bodies from those killed by this plague attracted those rats even more, and the fleas that were on these rats were carried over. It was the perfect transportation. And pictured on the left, you can see the exact kind of flea that caused this plague. So during this time, much like today's world, people were quarantined during this time. Although the word quarantine was coined at this point, and it originates from the word quaranta giorni, which means 40 days. And this is how long they had to quarantine when they were showing symptoms or started to get sick, which is much different than our 2 weeks. Unlike our current time period, people had no idea how disease spread and how disease was caused. Instead of cleaning things like cleaning up the streets and cleaning their tools and such, they actually believed that they had to smoke out bad air. So cigars or smoking and creating a really smoky environment. Like herbs, they would smoke herbs a lot. They would use leeches, and they would often bloodlet and assumed that this would be what would help cure people. And it did not, and often actually worsened the people's condition or spread the disease even quicker. On the picture on the left, I have a picture of a plague doctor, and these were the doctors that went around studying the Black Plague and trying to figure out how to cure it and how to stop it. Their very iconic masks were designed that way because they felt they had to stuff posies in the beak-like part of it to help keep the plague away. And their pieces were often filled with red glass and was very distorted and made it hard for them to see, because it was believed that if you looked into the eyes of someone who had this disease, it would spread to you via that. As an overall, the Black Plague killed 200 million people worldwide, and it could spread over 2 miles every single day. The populations of towns went down about 33% at the least, and all the way up to 90%. In England, it was hit at a much quicker rate, and it caused a lot more sudden death, as it was after the disease had evolved and grown in its journeys across the continent. The coronavirus has killed about 2 million people, in perspective to this 200 million people that the Black Plague killed. The Black Plague was actually blamed on the Jews, and many people were killed and tortured because of their beliefs, because the people were afraid and didn't know how to explain it, and falsely accused the Jewish people. There was one king in Poland, and he actually was very against this. He was one of the very few people who was very against this publicly. And he made his kingdom a very safe place for all refugees, all Jewish refugees, to come to, where they would be taken care of and would be given protection from other people. John Milton and his wife and his daughters, they were affected directly during this outburst of the plague. The resurgence of this made it so that their family had to quickly retreat into isolation, as many people had to do here when the pandemic first started. He ran with his family to a secluded little cottage in Chalfont, St. Gilles, where he finished writing Paradise Lost. This is also where he wrote the sequel to Paradise Lost. And he spent, I believe, the rest of his days there. Here we have a few pictures of the home that he retreated to. On the left, this is his writing desk. So he actually wrote Paradise Lost at this desk. And this is a place that you can go see still today, and tour it. And all of the inside remains the same as it was when it was, while he was living there. In the middle, there's a guest area. This is where they would receive people into their homes, and they would often sit here and talk. On the right, this was his literary garden. So all of the types of flowers that he wrote about were in this garden, actually. And it was planted for this. The bottom is labeled as the kitchen, and this is where they would have their meals together, him and his wife and his daughters. And you can see at the end the large fireplace stove that they would use to cook. To finish up my slide, I would like to discuss once more about how there is still hope in times like this. We were able to see John Milton was able to write a whole epic poem and a sequel to it while in this quarantine. And all of these people suffered a great deal, and it was very hard for them to be able to know what was happening. And today we have more resources to be able to understand things. And it's important for us to be able to use those resources and to remember that there's still hope, and that this pandemic is not going to last forever, and that we can persevere and go on to create great things even in the midst of our trials.